Chief Justice, and may it please the Court. My name is Hunter Rhyne, and I too represent the respondent in this case, Mr. Larry Nightingale, and I'll be discussing the Fourth Amendment standing issue for the Court. We respectfully request that this Court affirm the ruling by the United States Court of Appeals for the 14th Circuit and hold that the unauthorized driver of a rental car does have standing to sue over a search of the rental car. We ask that the Court hold this for the following reasons. First, because this Court should adopt the totality of the circumstances approach when making a determination about whether or not the unauthorized driver of a rental car has standing to sue over an unconstitutional search of that car. And second, because even if this Court declines to adopt a totality of the circumstances test, it should instead use the test that the Eighth and the Ninth Circuits adopted, requiring both permission and joint control over the rental car. Your Honor, every circumstance is different. So this bright line, rigid, draconian rule requiring that any driver not listed on the rental car contract does not have standing is completely unreasonable, and it prevents them from asserting a legitimate expectation of privacy in the car. And this Court has generally shied away from rigid, inflexible laws that prevent people from asserting their constitutional rights, as this Court did in Illinois v. Gates when it abandoned a rigid two-pronged test to determine whether or not an officer had probable cause to make a search in favor of a more totality of the circumstances approach, using the two prongs as merely factors amongst a whole host of other things that they would look at to make a determination about probable cause.
So are you asking this Court to expand on its former rulings?
Yes, Your Honor. Just as this Court did in Illinois v. Gates, it should expand on a more rigid bright line test. In fact, this Court should use the same reasoning that the Sixth Circuit adopted in the United States v. Smith, where they actually used a totality of the circumstances approach to determine a driver's legitimate expectation of privacy in a car. This test came from language in Raucus versus the state of Illinois, where the Court held that no single factor will determine whether or not a person has a legitimate expectation of privacy. And in Smith, the unauthorized driver, in Smith, the Court used a five-factor test to determine whether or not the unauthorized driver had standing to sue over a search of the rental car that they were driving. Those five factors are, first, whether or not the driver was involved in the rental process. And in this case, Respondent Nightingale was involved in the rental process. He both used his credit card to pay for the rental car online and reserved the rental car in his name. Second, whether the unauthorized driver had a valid driver's license. Here, Mr. Nightingale had a valid driver's license, as the record reflects on Roman numeral 4. And the third factor was whether or not there was a spousal or familial relationship between Mr. Nightingale and Ms. Sparrow, the authorized driver of the rental car. The record is silent as to whether or not there was any familial relationship between the two. However, they had known each other for an extended period of time, and as a result, we can draw a reasonable inference that they had a close relationship that would be akin to a family relationship, or at the very least an intimate one. As to the fourth factor, whether the renter gave the unauthorized driver permission to drive the car, we can draw a reasonable inference from the record that on Roman numeral 5, Ms. Sparrow gave Mr. Nightingale the keys to the rental car with an implicit permission to return the car to Utopia Incorporated, where they picked it up originally, because the car was rented in Mr. Nightingale's name and he was financially responsible for it. As to the fifth factor, whether or not the officer engaged in unlawful conduct during the stop, we can see that the stop was lawful. However, because Mr. Nightingale does satisfy the previous four factors, he satisfies a majority of the factors required by this totality of the circumstances test. And thus, if this Court uses the reasoning in the Sixth Circuit, United States v. Smith, then this Court should hold that in this case, Mr. Nightingale did have standing to sue over the unconstitutional search of the rental car that he was unauthorized to drive in this case. For the foregoing reasons, we respectfully request that this Court affirm the ruling by the United United States Court of Appeals for the 14th Circuit.